Welcome to episode 8 of International Expansion Explained. Today, my guest, Allison Yeager, is the principal consultant of Bridge Intercultural Consulting. She's a cross-cultural communication consultant, international business and market entry advisor, and executive coach who focuses on helping foreign clients improve their individual and organisational success in the US market. While she works with companies around the world, Allison's speciality is in bridging cultural differences between businesses in the US and East Asia. Allison, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you on here because I know we're going to have a great time this afternoon. Hi, Susan. Sun's out in Scotland. See, Allison and I have already been talking. Sun might be out in Scotland, but in Ohio, Allison has aircon. So,
But we finally have rain. So, okay, it took us all 30 seconds to get off topic.
Susan, it's your fault.
This
How
is why we
terrible.
can't have nice things.
Yeah, this is why we have to go live to try and keep us accountable, I guess. But let's start out on what is our official topic. Let me ask you, how was it that you got into intercultural topics with East Asia? What was it that fascinated you about international business and especially about East Asia?
So, for me, it's rather a lifelong journey. And when I was in school, so we'll go back all the way to when I was tiny, like it was my natural inclination to want to help people from other cultures. If I saw someone that didn't know English, I'm like, oh, I need to go help them because they look lost. Or we had new students coming into the schools. I'm like, okay, I'll help the foreign students because no one else wanted to. And when I went into college, I'm like, I'm going to do international relations. And then I had this amazing idea that I will find a more profitable degree and did history, which did not work. By the way, history was not more profitable. But it did set the foundation for so much of what I do. And it's probably 8, 9 years ago, I started working with Japanese companies in the US Midwest. And they were struggling. They came to me for English. And I already had a background in doing marketing and business consulting and helping them improve businesses. And then as we were learning English, they were like, but I don't know how to present. I'm struggling with presenting and selling and all these things. And I was able to go, that's not a language issue. That's a cultural issue. And then we started within these companies adjusting from an English education perspective to we need to change how you format your presentations. We need to change how you format your sales or your discussions or your meetings and work through the cultural differences. Yes, language is a part of that, but that is one narrow aspect of all of the issues that these Japanese companies were facing. And that's really how it got that start, where it's like starting with English and it's not English.
Yeah, and those are some pretty meaty topics, to be honest. I mean, I think we could talk for an hour on how to reformat presentations
Oh my
or
God.
how to do sales or any of those topics. But what were the most let's say what were the most common misconceptions, because you were working mostly with expats or executives who'd been sent from Japan and later, I guess, Korea also,
Mhm.
to work in the US for a branch of a Japanese company, or they were working for American companies?
The people who I got started with were Japanese subsidiaries in the
Okay.
US.
Yeah.
And so in the US, they would come over through 3 to 5 years and go back home again. And with them, they would bring all of the Japanese cultural norms. I'm just going to focus on Japan. It's easier than
Yeah.
listing out countries. But they would bring all of their cultural expectations of things that worked in Japan. And they would come over here, usually with very little preparation. They would be like, "Do you speak English? Great, you can come on over." And that was all. Like, and even then, sometimes the English, they still didn't understand English that well. That was all the preparation. And
Yeah.
so that was the biggest misconception was, as long as you speak English, you will have no problems. And if you're not doing a good job in the US, it is not because of cultural differences, it's because you just are nervous and you don't know how to sell.
But actually, that's how I got to do Asia as well, because at the time, my boss at the time, he said to me, "Your English is better than all of the rest of the staff who are Austrian. And therefore, you'll understand the Asian English better than we do, so you can take care of Asia in future." So it seems to
And
be a
there's
fairly global phenomena, just assuming that English skills set you up for life.
you and they are necessary. I'm not
Yeah,
going to deny how
of course.
necessary they are, but that's 5%
Yeah.
of what's needed.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get by with not having cultural adaptations across cultures or cultural knowledge of how other countries operate. But would you rather have a $2 million deal or a $20 million deal? Do you want the integration to take 3 months? Do you want it to take 10 years?
Yeah.
It's not whether or not you can, but how much time do you waste or save? And how much do you make or lose in your profit? Those
Definitely.
are the major issues. And it doesn't matter if it's US going abroad or Asians or any foreign country coming in. The issue tends to be, I speak English, what I do will work anywhere. And I'll have that same arrogance either coming in or going out. It's like, I'm American, I speak English. Everyone should know how to deal with an American. I'm like, you're not in the US anymore.
Yeah.
East Asia, especially, which is our focus, East Asia versus the US are almost polar opposites on
Yes.
everything. Our learning styles in school, our presentation styles, how we show confidence, how we show leadership.
Yeah.
And it's not that one is right or wrong, because that's contextual.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you
Of
have to
course.
know what the other one is.
Absolutely. So let's dig into that just a little bit. If when you see Japanese executives or East Asian executives who are coming into the US,
Mhm.
usually how do they structure, for example, a presentation compared to the way that um, a US American company would expect the presentation to be structured? What would be some of the, let's say, the key points that are different?
The things that I have found with Asian companies doing presentations is, first of all, they are incredibly humble. Again, not a problem, but the way they show humbleness tends to come across as very weak, I guess is the best term, where it's, do you really know what you're talking about? So part of
Yeah.
it is just how they present themselves. It's like, we would like to talk about if you would be so willing to do this. And the American side would be, just tell me what it is you want.
Yeah.
I do this. This is the problem I fix. I can help you. Let's talk. Let's sign the contract. We're done. And we are very transactional and they are very relationship based. So an American will come into a presentation expecting more of a transactional sales presentation. And the Asian contingent has a tendency to come in like, okay, well, we're building this up. We need to talk consensus. It's going to take time. And these norms are opposite. But then the presentation themselves typically they will start, this is who I am. Here's where I went to school. Here's who my advisor was. Here are my degrees. Here are who I'm working with. I'm like, I don't care. It's not about you. But that's how you show authority.
Yeah.
In that culture.
Yes.
But here, it's like, I don't care about you. Until I care about your product, I don't even care about anything you have to say about yourself.
Yeah.
And
I
it
mean,
won't be wrong.
and that even feels, I mean, that for me is also one of the things that if an American presents in Europe, it also feels very much like they fall through the door and they're already selling at you. And for a European, even though we're far more transactional than Asians, then for a European that also feels it feels very brash and aggressive. You know, it feels like you're having something pushed at you and you don't even know who the person is yet. So yeah, I can
Um,
understand it's really a tough call for, especially for Japanese who are kind of that extreme polar opposite, who have been taught to be very polite and humble and show respect for everybody.
Spoiler alert on my end. It's kind of pushy here too. I mean, we're more accustomed to it. But there
Yeah,
is a level, even in the US, is too much.
yeah,
And you don't always know where that is. And it
yeah,
comes back to not an intentional arrogance, but that idea of there's only one right way to do things.
yes,
And there isn't. There's a right way to do things in a certain situation, in a certain culture. But it's all relative. And a
yeah,
lot of companies and a lot of individuals overlook the it's relative part of it.
yeah, for sure. I mean, this is really, it's really tough, and it takes a lot of, let's say, it takes a lot of subtle feeling to really pick up on those small signals to know, am I being pushy enough? Am I moving forward fast enough, for example, with my sales presentation? Or am I needing to give them more context in order to prove that I know what I'm talking about before I can move to the next stage of my presentation? When I was first working, I worked in a corporate environment where we were in a British company who was French owned, which is always forecast, this is predestined to be like, it's like ongoing battle. And I used to, if I had to present, I used to have to, for the French, I used to have to build up my presentation, that I brought my arguments. Then I brought, first of all, you brought an argument, like a thesis. Then you brought an antithesis. And then at the end, you brought the synthesis. So you had to build up in that way. Whereas if I was bringing arguments for the UK, then you would present more in a kind of US way, that you would give them the outcome at the beginning and then explain how you came to that conclusion, because you'd already given them the conclusion. So if the top brass turned off their brain after the first 2 minutes of your presentation, they'd heard the most important things, and you gave the justification, if you like, to the rest of the team, so that they would rubber stamp whatever it was you wanted to do. And I could imagine that with East Asian clients, it's also a similar type of situation, that they need to learn how to present which information and when to push and when to give context.
And I find it, understandably, I find it very, very challenging for Asian executives, especially, to take the leap of trust that there are changes and you need to make them. There is an element of trust in that. And we also have the concept of face, which I'm sure most of the people between you and me and people in the chat there's that concept of face that we also have to keep in mind. And every culture has some concept of this, but it is the most prevalent and the most severe in an Asian culture.
Yeah.
And taking that trust that what you are being advised to do makes you look like a strong leader is hard, because
Yeah.
they're accustomed to, if I want to look like a strong leader, I need to follow this format.
Yeah.
Like, yes, in Japan. And if I present in Japan, I have to show all my credentials.
Yes.
Like that's what I need to do. But if you're doing it in the US, that's not how you show strength. You're showing weakness. And you can rationally understand that, but being able to emotionally put this into action and to take that leap of trust that you do have to change to this, which is so foreign to you, that is a hard thing.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that it's even harder when you're already sent on an assignment abroad, you're already out of your familiar environment, everything feels strange, you're exhausted because, let's face it, if you're working all the time in a foreign language, then it's exhausting to work in a foreign language. I mean, it took a long time for me to reach the same energy levels when working in German or working in French as it is if I'm working in English, because for a long time, if I was working all day in German, I would be exhausted at the end of the day, purely from a linguistic perspective, because your brain is all the time trying to yeah, trying to cope with that. And like Clean says, this question of thinking about how to give face in different cultures and knowing that somehow you have to give face, but also knowing you don't know how to do that properly in another culture is also something that's really stressful for people.
It's stressful. I don't know about you, Kathryn, but even for me, when I know a large number of the differences, I'm not native Japanese, for example. I don't know every single difference. I'm still learning. It will be a lifelong education. But even knowing what I know, knowing significant differences and expectations, it's nerve wracking. I still mess up.
Yeah,
For me, the concept of silence, as everyone can probably hear, where I'm just like talking nonstop, but the concept of silence to just think and being part of normal conversation is a difficult concept for me to apply. Not to understand, I am aware of it, but to apply it. And the reverse is true when the Japanese are here. And the fact that we don't have those silent pauses are
yeah,
just as overwhelming.
yeah. See, we did at least 3 seconds there of a silent pause. Just to
Yes, I
test.
can do it.
Just to test. Yeah, exactly. We can do it, but it has to be very conscious. It's not something it's something that we would naturally have in our flow of conversation. Normal. Between the two of us, for example, there wouldn't be any there would be very few there would be very few silences, even over a sustained longer period of time. But
We talked for 4 hours. That's why.
yeah, yeah, we can talk for 4 hours, that's no problem. So, but yeah. I mean, how do you go about where do you start if you are working with, for example, Japanese executives who lived in the US? How do
Mm.
you go about explaining to them about giving respect or managing silence? How do you go about explaining all of those concepts um, for the US culture to them?
So there's two parts to this. It really has to be someone who is willing to learn. Without that being part of the conversation, no matter what I say, it's not going to land. I can talk everyone's ear off. I can give them all the tools, all the frameworks, all the support, but if they're not actively willing to take it and implement it, it doesn't matter anything I say. But if we assume that they are wanting to learn, the first thing I typically tell them, and this is probably going to sound terrible, but the first thing I tell them is you're going to have to get comfortable with being rude. And it's not that we want people to be rude in the US, but our presentation style tends to come across as very aggressive, very loud, and very rude.
Yeah.
It's not in the US, but there's that perception when I'm dealing with Asian clients that we are very rude or arrogant in the way we do things. So that's like the number one thing. Like, you have to get comfortable with being rude. You need to interrupt people. You need to say what's on your mind. And one of the hardest concepts is telling me yes or no directly.
Yes.
Because in the US, we are so accustomed to having multiple cultures, multiple languages, multiple accents. And that is part of our directness. You can't communicate across cultures if you don't have that direct aspect. And in the US, we've grown used to that. But in Japan or Korea, it is a more unified culture. There isn't that cultural norm of 30 languages in one city where it's all pretty large group of the population. And there's just not that familiarity. And you have to be direct. We're used to it, but they aren't. There's all this unwritten, unspoken communication that they expect.
Yeah. It's like, what is it they call it? Reading the air, listening to the air. Yeah. I'm not sure which. Yeah. And I guess, I mean, I think it's interesting what Jerry says. He said that the Finns are masters of using silence in negotiations, and that they just keep quiet until the point where the other party starts negotiating with themselves. And I've seen that happen before now between Chinese and Germans, where the Chinese just kept quiet until the Germans started actually contradicting themselves and agreeing to stuff that the Chinese actually asked for, but they couldn't, they couldn't manage with the silence in the room. They felt like they had to say something. So, yeah.
We're starting to implement that in the US. As a sales tactic. It's becoming very common to say, once you give a price, say nothing.
Yeah.
But it's still uncomfortable because as Americans, we don't like silence. The best American negotiators implement silence, but culturally, silence is not fun. Silence means I did something wrong. Silence means you don't like what I said. Silence means all of these unspoken rules that aren't true typically in this conversation. But that's what we feel. And we let feelings dictate so much of our sales, so much of our business.
Yeah. And I think it's got to be so hard for all Asians, but especially East Asians who've maybe lived in a more closed cultural environment in the past, to kind of give up everything that their grandma and their parents told them was polite to, as the way of behaving, to actually go outside of themselves and be more extroverted and be, let's say, more, for their feeling, to be extremely pushy and rude, when actually they're probably still being quite hesitant about the way they present things to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so what are the most complicated, or what are the things that they find that in your experience that your clients find most difficult about selling in the US? Because we talked up front that we would discuss a little bit more about selling, and obviously presenting. We looked at presenting in some detail, which is a big part of at least the initial part of most sales processes. And we've touched on negotiating, talking about the price, and then just being quiet and being comfortable with that silence. How does that go generally in your experience? What do East Asians usually need to change if they want to sell successfully to Americans?
It depends. It depends. Everything depends. But part of it does depend on who they're selling to. Are they selling to someone who is accustomed to dealing with Asian partners and has an understanding of the culture? Or are they selling to Americans that aren't familiar or don't care or any part of that? Trying to figure out what's the partnership or the relationship or knowledge skill of both sides. But if we're going to go with someone who has no idea how to deal with Asian culture, no familiarity, some of the things I find to be frustrating is there's an expectation that you should sit in a certain spot inside a meeting room that shows authority, everything else. That the discussions in the US, we're accustomed to debate. And a meeting will have debate, it will have discussion, it will have interruptions, things like that, where the Asian contingent will have already discussed what they want to say, and then they pretty much have a spokesperson to discuss it. If they need to, they'll talk more about it after the meeting. But the meeting itself does not have the debate or the discussion. And the transactionality. It's we can listen to something and buy it in the same time. And then we'll have 15-page contracts.
Only
And
15?
if we're lucky, depends on the industry. But trying to navigate just how transactional we are. Again, that's why we don't care who your mentor was 10 years ago. We care about the problem, the solution, and can we utilize it? Yes or no? We're on a time crunch. Move it along. Just tell me what you need. I'll decide whether I want it or not. I'm going to move on. I don't care. And that is so disconcerting. Like, but we haven't had karaoke, we haven't had drinks, we haven't gotten to know anything about who you are. Why would you buy something if we haven't had these interpersonal relationships built? It's like in the US, we're changing jobs every 1 to 3 years. Who you are dealing with right now is probably not going to be in the company in 2 years. It's not about relationships. There is a relationship, but not in the way they expect it.
Yes. And I think that is exactly the crux of the matter, that it's not that there isn't a relationship, it's that the relationship works in a completely different way to the way that they expect. And so sometimes both sides don't actually see that there's a relationship because it's functioning so differently to what either the US side or the Asian side sees as being a normal functioning relationship. The Japanese are sitting and thinking, well, we didn't have a meal together yet. We didn't talk together. I don't know whether you have kids. I don't know whether you I don't know. I don't know where you went to school. Like you said, I don't know who is your mentor, your professor. I don't know what studies you have. So from my perspective, it feels like we don't have a relationship. And the American is thinking, why is he still talking? Why is he asking me all this private, personal stuff? And Leave me alone.
Because in HR, that's required here. You can't ask about marital status. You can't ask about kids. You can't ask about these things that are an integral part of building that relationship. For me, I'm way too honest and way too blunt. So if they ask, I say it. But that's not typical.
Yeah.
That is not typical in these discussions. Like, I don't care
Yeah.
about any of that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that makes it really quite hard for both sides, because everybody feels all the time like they're on to like they're kind of caught off balance the whole time for both sides. And I guess people sometimes then do things, or they make deals that maybe are not ideal for both sides, because they were simply not as comfortable in themselves as they normally would be. And I'm guessing also
Yes.
that this situation of feeling like they've not been given enough respect, or that they're, I can see that Todd and Kathleen are discussing the topic of giving face. That
It is a
this is
complex
also
thing all on
something
its
that, yeah, that this is such a complex topic that people can really feel, it can really make a deal.
One of the things I have found useful, and it's become one of my offerings, is sitting in on a meeting as an intermediary, not as part of a sales discussion or any part, whether it's sales or negotiations or whatever. I'm not engaged in that. But I will come in as that neutral third party, and then both sides can utilize me and, like, what are they saying? Did I
What are they
understand this
really saying?
right? Because in English, especially, and it's going to be any culture, but when Japanese or Korean come over and they're dealing with an American, and especially certain types of salespeople or certain types of negotiators, they will use language as a weapon.
Yeah.
And unless you are a truly native speaker, even then, they can use that weapon against someone who does not speak English as a first language. It will sound one way and it will mean something else. Going back to the unspoken conversations that they're used to, but they've become so accustomed to us being straightforward, they assume what is being said is what is being meant. But a lot of negotiators will use English as a weapon. And sometimes you will have a translator who is able to navigate that. Other times they'll bring me in to help navigate the cultural aspect. What is actually being said? Not what are the translated words, but what are they trying to get out of me?
Yeah. I think it's important that people not only learn to speak languages, which is of course a very valuable way to learn to understand another culture, but also to simply have somebody at the beginning, especially, who can act as a bridge. I mean, I was really lucky when I first was working in China that I had somebody who could explain to me when they're actually the words are this and this, but in actual fact what they're really saying to you is they have no idea what they want to do right now. Just give them some time, let it sink in a bit, give them time to sleep on it, and they'll bring you a discussion tomorrow. They can't give you a decision right now. Just those kind of things, just to have somebody to explain to you the cultural issues of why this means that. It's so
And
important.
if you're lucky, you will have those people as clients. If you're
Yeah.
unlucky, you are in trouble. But for me, when I first started this, one of the things I didn't realize, so many things I did wrong, but I had amazing clients who worked me through, like, I don't think we're talking about the same thing. And they were we'd built a relationship. I was with them for like 3 years as a corporate client. And over time, they became much more open with me and talking about things that I never expected. Because you'd cracked that outer nut of that shell of, you're not in, I don't know you as much, I'm not going to be honest with you. And they pulled that away, like, okay, now you're part of us. We will tell you all of these things with no filter. And one of them was the idea of yes and the idea of no. We're like, but they said yes. But how we interpret that is not a language issue.
Yes.
Everyone knows what yes and no means. If they speak English, they probably know yes and no. But how we interpret that is significantly different between the cultures.
Yeah.
For example, yes means I understand, not yes, I agree.
Mm-hmm. Or it means, yes, I heard you. Or, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I understand what you're saying. I don't agree with it, but I understand. Or no is just not said. And here, no is not necessarily a negative, but it comes across as very rude. Like, did you just tell me no? Do you realize that you just attacked who I am? You should have said this in a roundabout way so that everyone saves face. Why did you just tell me no? Just say,
Mm-hmm.
this will be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, I'm American. I say no. I'm very direct. And part of my role is to make that make it more familiar, but also make it more comfortable. Make mistakes with me. Have me as that sounding board, really,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
to make those mistakes, because I'm not going to get offended if you're blunt. I'm not going to get offended if you're upfront about a lot of things. I
Yeah.
do get upset when something is not as direct and I didn't understand the nuances behind it.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes very frustrating because I'm like, if you just told me, we could have made everything much easier for you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I do realize that that is part of the culture. So again, it doesn't really offend me. I just feel bad. I'm like, if you just told me, I could have been more supportive because you were telling me what you really needed and you weren't talking in that roundabout way.
Yeah. And so what are the things, if you have a new client,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a new client, how do you brief them as to the things that they need to tell you before you can before you can help them effectively on that kind of thing? Because I'm sure that those are then the issues where you say to them, I need you to tell me how this or about that. These are exactly the points that are like the most frequent points of a friction
Friction.
between the two cultures, right?
Usually I have a list of things. I kind of see what are the people like, what are their backgrounds, which makes me sound very Asian. Like, what are their backgrounds? But truly, are they familiar with American culture?
Yeah.
Or have they just visited the US and that's all? Or did
Yeah.
they live here for 6 years?
If
That
they
will
studied
change.
or something like that, yeah.
Right. Do you already have a foundational understanding and do you need the advanced support? Or do you have a minimal understanding of the cultural side? And do we really need to start from the basics? Typically, when I'm dealing with executives in the US, it's only the basics,
Yeah.
not through any fault of anyone, except maybe even higher up leadership for not giving them that support. But things I'll talk about are open communication. You need to be transparent with me, or I cannot help you. Or you will not get the support that you could have gotten.
Yeah.
And I am going to tell you yes or no. I am not trying to offend you. I am not trying to be rude, but I need to be direct so that there is no confusion in what I'm saying. And there will still be confusion.
Yeah.
There's still miscommunication. And that happens within the same culture. So saying, oh, it's because you're dealing with a foreign culture, you need to know more. Well, if I go to Silicon Valley versus New York City versus Birmingham, Alabama, those are going to be 3 very different cultures within
Yeah.
the US. And just laying out the groundwork of, here are things I'm going to be doing. Here's what I need from you. I need transparency. I need honesty. I need you to be as direct as possible, knowing that I'm still not going to get that. But setting that foundation of, this is a partnership. I truly cannot support you to the best of my ability if you don't tell me what's working, what's not working, what you're confused about, where you don't agree with something. Because a disagreement does not mean something's wrong. A disagreement means there's miscommunication or a misunderstanding. That was not good English. Or a bad understanding of what is expected.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. A disagreement is not a bad thing, but the way we understand that is so different. In Asia, you have a very Confucian style of education. You listen to everything you're being told, you take it in, rote memorization, learn all the information. In the US and in Europe, it's Socratic. Debate, argue, explore, question, question, question.
Yeah.
And there are variations within that, but the fundamental styles of education are different. So where I need the clarity in the debate, it is very uncomfortable for Asian clients to debate, to argue, to question verbally. They might be questioning inside, but to ask me to my face is a very difficult thing for them to apply. And that comes down to a lot of application is where the struggle is. Not the
Yeah.
knowledge. The knowledge, I can provide the knowledge, but the application of the knowledge is where resistance is the strongest.
Yeah. And I think that also, like you said, this application and this asking people questions and drilling down is something that also makes it quite difficult if you're in a sales function as an Asian in the US, because you need to ask questions to get to the bottom of what is the problem or what is the issue that your potential client needs you to solve. And if you don't feel comfortable asking and asking and asking, you feel like you're being annoying or you're being pushy or something like that, then it's very difficult to really get to the source of the pain, let's say, for
I
the
was having a
question.
discussion last night with someone who's in Japan right now. He's not Japanese, so he's kind of seeing it from an outside perspective as well. And we were discussing questioning people. And if you don't ask the right questions, you don't always get the right answers. It's like, you
Yes.
didn't ask, so why should I tell you?
Mm-hmm.
Americans will just keep giving you information for the most part, or in comparison. But for the Japanese, it's like, if you didn't ask me the question, I'm not going to just offer it up.
Yeah.
Which leads to miscommunication. I'm like, why didn't you tell me this?
Mm-hmm.
And they're, well, you didn't ask. I didn't
Yeah.
know I was supposed to. I
Yeah.
didn't know this was a problem.
I've had that happen to me in China as well, or
It's
also in Korea, that I didn't get a piece of information because I didn't realize that was because I didn't know what I didn't know. And I
right.
didn't know which question to ask. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's
that
it's
can,
hard.
yeah, it's hard. And it's really hard to learn that kind of cross-cultural, or to learn a new culture when it's not something that you're living in and living surrounded by. It's very hard to think. I mean,
I would say that you and I both struggle with that still, even with all the work we've done. It's
yeah,
still a challenge. It will be a lifelong challenge
of
because there's going to be
course.
so much. You aren't native. Even if
Yeah,
you are native, people spend their entire lives talking negotiation tactics for corporate business at this level.
Yeah.
That is their entire career. And
Yeah.
like trying to get across all the cultures, you're always going to make mistakes. But the
Yeah.
goal is to minimize those for the most effective conversations.
Yeah, and I think also that if you can show that you've learned something and that you're very open to learning new things, then people are also much more forgiving than if you show absolutely no awareness whatsoever that there is a cultural difference, or that the
Right.
cultural difference is something that needs to be, that needs to be considered.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we had a question from Doug actually a little while ago, but I think it fits better just now. Um, he's asking which books we would recommend on this. I mean, I think one of my favorites for sure is Erin Meyer's Culture Map. But this is your specialist field. What else would you recommend?
I'm actually going to go a little off topic because it's me. It's
And because
not,
we've been very good up until now.
I've been so good. Um, I don't really have a book that I use more than others. It's more I synthesize all of them and my own experience to apply the parts that I feel are the most relevant and always learning from other people. But my favorite is not a book. My favorite is reading academic articles, or people are going to laugh, going to Reddit, because you're able to see people's real challenges. Following some of these social platforms, you can see from an expat's point of view, why are the Japanese doing this? Why are they doing this? How come this is going on? Or on the American side, you'll see the Japanese going, why are Americans doing this? You're seeing the questions in real time. And then you're
Yeah.
seeing the replies as well. Most of these books are amazing. They're amazing foundational resources. However, I do find them a bit dated. Culture changes quickly, language changes quickly.
Yeah.
And being able to keep tabs on it in real time through Reddit, Instagram, Facebook groups, even LinkedIn, that is where you find what challenges are people facing now? Are
Mm-hmm.
there themes to it? What surprises people? BuzzFeed is a good one because they've kind of collected a lot of these stories. But it's like, what are weird things Americans do? What are weird things Japanese do? What are weird things Austrians do? It's not that they're bad, but you see it from an outside perspective.
Yeah.
So for
Yeah.
me, it's academic, where they are really diving into the deep research part of it, and they're finding the background reasons. And then you also bring in the modern social media as that reference point, and then you merge them together.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Reading the books are good, but applying those two concepts together, I find be quite beneficial. I'm lucky that I have some Japanese contacts that I'm very, very, very close to. And they are happy to ask me questions about American culture. I'm like, okay, I know I need to apply this. This is a question people have. At the same time, I'll say, hey, I'm reading about this. This is something I'm seeing it be a major issue. Would you agree from a Japanese perspective? Like, yeah, I never would have thought of it, but yeah. And it's the I never would have thought of it that
Yes.
Reddit, BuzzFeed, and stuff can really give you. Again,
Yeah.
changing it. With Shinzo Abe being assassinated, I'm like, how should I respond to this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I
Of
don't know how
course.
to respond to this because I know there's some discord in how people understood him, whether they liked him or not liked him. Like, I don't know. I'm not in Japan. I don't know what the feelings are. I
Yeah.
don't know the best way to reply. And then I'm on the other side. I'm like, we have a lot of issues going on here. Depends on the situation.
Yep,
But that's why you have someone local that specializes in a certain market to help you work through that.
definitely. And I think that that is really the key point, that it's important to talk with people who are really specialized in the different markets, whether that be Japan, whether that be Kazakhstan, Serbia, or the US, and to really look into things in detail, because otherwise you're going to end up making mistakes, and making mistakes, the further away from home you get, the more expensive the mistakes are. And so generally it's great to be able to reach out to a specialist such as yourself if you're looking to have a
I
subsidiary,
mean,
or if you've got a subsidiary and you're looking to send people across to the US, for
one of
sure.
the things, it's like I focus my outreach is, as you know, mostly East Asia,
Yeah,
Japan, South Korea, East and Southeast Asia, both of those. And that is my specialty. But even within that, I'm having conversations with people in the Netherlands, England. England and the US have major cultural differences. We speak the
yes.
same language. Kathryn, you and I had that discussion about what's a garden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a garden. I'm like, that's where you grow fruits and vegetables. You're like, that's no, that's like the grass around your house. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
no, a garden is where you grow fruits and vegetables. And the same words, we're both speaking English, we're having a conversation, but certain words mean different things.
Yeah.
The way we do content marketing is different. The way we do so many things or experience the world are different, even with the same language. South Africa, Nigeria, dealing with all these cultural differences and from people from other areas, it helps inform issues that everyone has. So taking it from as many sources as possible. A book is great. Going back to the question, a book is great, but it tends to be outdated for the most modern issues. It
Yeah.
is a foundation. It is a great place to start. Get your bearings, baseline culture. Like in the US, we have a baseline culture. But is it diving into the differences between Silicon Valley and Houston? Is it diving into the cultural difference between um, Minneapolis and Miami? Probably not. It's dealing
No.
with baseline.
Yeah. It's dealing with generalities, isn't it? Because a
Mhm.
book can't cover everything. But for sure, there are some good ones out there that are interesting places to start. And I think adding, like you mentioned, layering in social media on top of that, there are a lot of resources these days that are available for anybody who's looking for intercultural. It's probably never been so easy to talk with people from other cultures, and just to,
Right.
just to get into contact with people. So I see that we're coming a little bit to the end of our time. It seems to have really flown by. And my last question is always, knowing what you do now, what advice would you give to your younger self starting out on your international journey?
I don't, that's a really hard one. And I know you asked me earlier, so I was prepared. But I don't have a good answer. And here is why. When I was in college, which does not feel that long ago, but apparently it is, the world was so different.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much different I could have done things. Like, I wanted to go into international relations. At that time, I'm like, there is no future in that. What do you do with that? There wasn't the access or the knowledge of these possibilities. So I would say, going back, one, it would be take a chance. Two, it would be use social media. Like, I wish so much that when YouTube first came out, I had made the most of it. But I was so focused on being the good student. like doing everything by the book, being the good student, doing what I am supposed to do. And in the history department, especially, YouTube first came out and someone brought it in as a resource. And the teacher's like, what is wrong with you? There is no academic backing to this. How can you use this as a resource? There's no secondary follow-up. There is no peer review. You cannot use this as a resource. So my brain goes, okay, so this is terrible. It has no value. Just ignore YouTube. And now I'm like, man, YouTube is one of the biggest channels for SEO and engagement in East Asia. Like that's bigger than most of them. And I was more confident being in front of a camera then than I am now. If we're having a conversation, I forget about it. But if it's just me, I'm like, hi, here is my TED Talk. I really wish I had implemented social media to its full extent when it came out, because that has opened up the world.
Yeah.
I get online right now. For those not in Asia, it's LINE, not just online. But it's a social media app. I can call my friends in Japan or Singapore or Taiwan. And I do. I just call them on the app or WhatsApp or whatever.
Yeah.
The world is so small now, which means it's much easier to get information, but you can almost get too much information and you don't know which one's right, which one's wrong, because it is not peer reviewed.
Yeah.
You're just getting information. How do you know? So it's more accessible, but it's too accessible and you can't sift through it all. Or you don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
It's still a topic. But
yeah. No, but I think taking a chance on doing something is probably the most frequent answer that I got to that question. But it's always interesting to see
build
what people
networks.
say. Yeah. Yes, that's true.
Keep in contact. Keep in contact with your network.
Yeah. Be very conscious about keeping in contact with people, I think is always a good one. Yeah.
Relationships.
Yeah. Anyway, Allison, it has been lovely talking to you today. I will put in the YouTube recording, I will put all of the links to your social and to your website, so that if anybody is looking to contact you, they can either connect with you on LinkedIn or they can send you an email or so on. And thank you very much once again. It's been a pleasure to talk.
Thank you so much. And everyone's free to contact me, send me a message, say hi, whatever. Just network.
Cool.
Thank you so much.